Hey everyone, Tom Carl. Welcome to Politics in Perspective. I'd like to thank worldviewtube.com and Ex American News for carrying us, AUN TV, and of course Rumble and YouTube. And you can find the catalog of shows on politicalvanguard.com. I think we have a great show this week. The opinion editor at California Post, the newly launched California Post, Joel Pollak, will be joining us. I'll, of course, have my opening statement. And we'll have a political roundup and an update on Iran, plus a special announcement from Annie Cyrus. So why don't we just jump right into my opening statement? And lo and behold, we had a jobs report. And of course, all of the brainiacs on the left and the Democrats' so-called economists who told us it was going to be a bad jobs report. And you know what? It turned out that it wasn't. Take a look at this. Well, first, why does this matter? This is why it matters. This is federal employment since actually slightly before 1970. You can see where it's been this graph. And on the far right is where it is today, at one of the lowest points really in 60, 70 years. Why does that matter, right? Because we cannot afford the federal government we have. And every government job not only clogs up the economy, but in the aggregate, it slows the economy down and adds long-term to the federal debt. And we can't afford it anymore. Period, full stop. We have 38 trillion in national debt. We're trying to bring the deficit down. All those federal workers draw from taxpayers and add to those deficits, but they also slow economic growth down. So that report, in the sense that because federal workforce is actually going down, is a great thing. And that was what 2025 was dedicated to in the Trump economy. Reducing federal regulations, reducing federal spending where they could, and reducing the total workforce. That'll pay dividends in the years ahead. How good was this report? Well, check out this little graph or graphic from CNN. CNN, of course, is a huge Trump critic, and this is one of their analysts, and she called it, first of all, in 2025, she said that Trump was going to drive us into recession. I don't really recall that recession, maybe you do. But she called this a hot jobs report. In fact, she said there's really nothing not to like about this report. Why is that? Even she mentioned the fact that government jobs have been falling. And so the 130,000 jobs included the drop of 40,000 in government jobs, which means that the private sector, it was 170,000 jobs. And this is the turn the economy needed to take. It is what Scott Bessent calls the privatization of economic growth. And what he means by that is we don't want the economy driven by the government. We want it driven by the private sector. And always remember that the larger the private sector versus the government, the more freedom there is. The larger government is compared to the private sector, the less freedom you have. So that's a great thing. But not all things are good in Washington, D.C. And of course, we're dealing with the fact that, which we're going to talk about in our third segment, about the voter ID bill. But for now, I want to turn to my latest op-ed on Substack. And lo and behold, another rich Democrat is leaving California. And this time, as you can see, it's Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg bought this mega mansion in Florida. Now, as you all know, Florida doesn't have any income tax. They're even trying to get rid of property tax in Florida. But as you can see from my title of my Substack, Democrat billionaires have promoted California Democrats and now are moving away from the wreckage. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, take a look at Zuckerberg. He actually has a mixed donation record. He gives money to Republicans and Democrats, playing both sides of the fence. It's not that he's not ideological, he's just trying to curry favor. But his Facebook foundations have given and helped the Democrats more, right? It isn't just him. Google, two of their guys took off. Now, everybody knows that Google grossly favors Democrats when it comes to their search engines. Stories over the years about how they buried anything Trump would say or Republicans. Look, I've been shadow banned on Facebook and pre-Twitter, pre-Elon Twitter. Those mega companies, along with others, the DoorDash guys said, well, the billionaires tax would harm me, so I can't stick around. So these guys that promoted Democrats, got them elected, knowing that all of them wanted to raise taxes, right? They want to raise taxes again, even if it's not the billionaires tax, they're going to raise it in some other way. Now they're taking off and leaving the wreckage behind. But it's not just that. It's a free country. They can go to another state. The problem is all of the government that they promoted and all of the tax increases that Democrats are going to push forward are going to be borne by you and me, the middle class. And that's what's so very wrong and hypocritical about them walking out the door. Now let's talk about our next subject when it comes to politics in general in my opening statement. And that's where the Democrat Party is today. Back to CNN. It's always awesome to put CNN's graphic up about where the status of America today, but let's look at it. What is this saying? You have voters saying Democrats are too liberal. Back in the 90s, 42%. Now, at 42%, that's almost, you could say that that's almost all Republicans, right? In 2013, it marches up to 48%. Well, 48% means that a significant number of independents now believe that as well. But 2025, it hits 58%. Now, that's a dramatic number. If a president had an approval rating, any president at 58% in this divided era, that would be remarkable. Getting 58% of Americans to agree on anything these days in this divided era, over my shoulder here, my book, you should buy it along with the Lessons of the American Civilization. Getting either one of them, meaning Democrats and Republicans, to agree is remarkable. And so where are we today if you look at that graphic? 58% of the country says the Democrats are too liberal. That is a gigantic opening for Republicans because it gives them the leeway to maneuver and take risks. But it also means that in the midterms, the Democrats, well, it's not that people are voting for the Democrats. It is because they would be mad at the Republicans. Why would they be mad at Republicans? Just like the English voters were mad at conservatives when they put in labor, not because they thought labor was so great, because they were mad that the Conservative Party didn't follow through and make things better. Republicans have made some things better, but they got to keep going. And as I've said before on this show, not only do they have to keep going, but what they have to do is present an agenda for the next election cycle and say, hey, here's what we accomplished, but here's what we're doing tomorrow, because elections are always about tomorrow. That's my opening statement. We'll be back with Joel Pollak and talk about the California Post, California politics in general. Please sign up Substack. And I post a lot on X and on Facebook and Instagram, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to Politics in Perspective. I have what I think is going to be a great segment for you. You're all aware that the California Post has been launched, and one of the important people in that role is the one and only Joel Pollak, who's taken a break to be with us. Joel, how are you?
I'm surviving. I'm good. I'm good. I'm better than surviving. I'm working hard and hardly working. I don't know. It's a Friday as we're taping this, so I've been at the end of another incredibly busy week. Late nights, early
And
mornings.
so, for those people who don't, you should look up Joel's work over the years. I appreciate him because he's not just a thinker; he's a well-informed, thoughtful thinker. Yes, he's not just a talker. He's done a lot of radio and things over the years. He's not just a writer. He's done that, but he crosses over into the actual doing and making a physical difference in people's lives in this fight for freedom. And Joel is one of America's best freedom fighters, and that starts with or ends most recently with your role in the California Post. But before we get to that, I want
Well,
people
wait
to
a
know
minute. First of all, I have to fact check you here. I don't think I'm that great.
there
But
you go.
thank you.
Okay,
Those are very nice things. Yes.
but you are fearless. So I want to start with this picture, the very first picture we're going to bring up of you, Annie. There you are
On the View.
on the View. Now, I think this was a more tame picture or time on the View with Joy Behar on the far left on the screen. But tell us about that experience.
Well, that was very interesting. They have never had me back again, by the way. But the you have to understand the atmosphere at the time. Trump won in 2016, and there was a panic that went throughout the left and the Democratic Party. And with that panic came a kind of curious terror on their part. And there was a weird kind of deference that they suddenly decided to show to conservatives because some of the smarter people on the left and in the liberal media said, okay, well, hang on, we have to understand who these people are. What happened here had to be caused by something, and let's try to figure these people out before we tear our hair out. So that was the backdrop. I mean, I think there was a little bit more receptivity to hearing what Trump supporting conservatives had to say simply because people were in shock. And once they got over the shock, their first way of coping was to look a little closer at what they had ignored for the entire 2016 campaign. But in the details of that particular appearance, I was approached by a couple of producers from ABC who were quietly conservative, who told me, we work on The View. They never let us have conservative guests, but we think you'd be a good guest on the program, and we're going to try to convince them to have you. So somebody reached out and I accepted, and then they canceled, or they were going to cancel. So then I thought, okay, well, forget this. And I went on social media and I said, ABC just canceled my appearance on The View. And very quickly that was reversed. And they said, okay, no, we want it back. So they had me on the show, and we talked about my book at the time, How Trump Won, which was the first book in print after Trump won the election. I had been working on a manuscript throughout the election, but to be honest, I didn't think he was going to win. So it was going to be a manuscript about how he lost. So I just changed the last couple of chapters, really. um, it was great to write a book where you didn't even predict the ending, and I freely admit that I was wrong. And I wrote the book, and we came out with it right away from Regnery at the time with my co-author Larry Schweikert, who took a different approach to the same topic. But we had the first print book out about the election, so they had me on to talk about that. Whoopi Goldberg wasn't there that day, but Joy Behar was. And what you see when you watch The View is a panel that is very left leaning, slanted to the left. And what you don't realize is how left wing the audience is. That is to say, when you're on the stage and you're looking out at this group of people who are applauding or laughing or reacting to what they're seeing on stage, they're quite left wing. They're very receptive to whatever Behar is saying. They are an audience that chooses to participate in the spectacle by making noise to support the left and drown out the right. So that was something I hadn't quite calculated. But the appearance went very well, and I had dinner the night before with a friend who had another friend who he brought to dinner, and she was not a Trump supporter. She was one of the Democrats who was very upset about Trump. So I asked her at dinner, what could someone like me say that would reassure someone like you? What would you want to hear most? And I don't really remember her answer, but that was my question. And that was the tone of the conversation. And I think that was really good preparation for The View. So I went on The View, and I think I was just much more relaxed. I had a sense of humor. There was one really funny moment where Steve Bannon and Reince Priebus, who were then tag teaming the early Trump administration, Steve as kind of strategic advisor or whatever his title was, and Reince Priebus as chief of staff. And there were rumors that the two of them weren't getting along. So they had just gone on stage at CPAC that week, and they had this very cozy kind of presentation. They kept slapping each other on the knee, which became a meme on social media. And Joy Behar said to me, after I said Steve was great to work with at Breitbart and so forth, Joy Behar said, "Did he ever touch your Priebus?" That was her joke. And it was pretty funny. So I mean, we had some lighthearted moments, and I think because it went so well, they never had me back again.
Yeah. or you were so or you were too effective in
Yeah,
your role, and they didn't like that.
you know, Howie
Okay,
Mandel
let's
was there. Just one other thing, Howie Mandel was standing backstage, and he's famously germophobic, right? He doesn't shake hands. So he gave me a fist bump as we came off. He goes, "You did well."
There you go.
Anyway, I mean
But
that's the
but
thing. I don't get invited onto these shows often because I do find it fun to talk to people who disagree with me, and I try to keep it lighthearted. Of course, I can also get hot under the collar sometimes, but when you try to reduce the amount of conflict, I guess it's not good for their business model, so they don't have you back.
there you go. All right, so I grew up in New York. I bet on Joe Namath in the '69 Super Bowl. I have the January 13th edition of 1969 of Joe Namath winning the Super Bowl of the New York Post. So to this day, one of the first things I do is go to the New York Post each morning. And for those who don't know, and if you could bring up, the New York Post is famous for its headlines, and now the California Post, Annie, if you would, and these are my two favorite front pages so far of the California Post. But Joel, for years, I have said that everybody talks about California being a one-party state, okay? But I think I just as importantly on a negative side is that California has had a one-party media. So please talk to us what the California Post, what was the inspiration, what's its mission, and how you are dealing with that.
Well, you're absolutely right. There's a huge media market in California, but it's only served by media outlets that support one side. There are a few conservative outlets. They tend to be podcasts or blogs, and you have the California Globe, you have John Fleischman's work, but you don't have an outlet that has access to print or to television or radio, really. So I guess there are some good radio hosts, I should say, and some are friends of mine. So they're making an impact, but there just isn't that large scale platform for the 40% of Californians who don't just knee jerk vote for the Democratic Party every time. That's a lot of people. So the New York Post and News Corp came in and said, "Hey, we have a market here." There are a lot of readers of the New York Post in California, yourself included, and they said, "Well, why don't we come up with the California Post, which has the branding and a little bit of the content of the New York Post, but is going to focus on California." So that's what we've done. And it's been a lot of fun. And I think it's having an impact already because I think we're already creating a kind of accountability that wasn't there before.
I agree. And if we can bring up the next graphic, it's not just to me the big stories, but you have two stories here that I highlighted, one of which I highlighted on Facebook, thanks to the CA post exposing the truth. Now, this is a story from a small town in the Central Valley related to high speed rail, and then one covering of the something going on in LA. And the one party system has been there, so one media system has been there so long that people didn't really know until recently that California had all these problems. But they've had problems for many years. So, and you're covering the whole state. How how do you get all these, you know, simply stated, how do you get all these stories from around the state? I know it must be long days for you.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of hard work. We have teams all over the state. That's basically how we do it. We are based in LA, so that's where our head office is and most of our employees. But we do have people covering things, and we also travel and send people to do stories. We sent a guy from LA to Mammoth this past week to cover all the unfortunate ski tragedies that have been happening. Not a very good ski season this year, despite all the precipitation. There's been some snow on Mammoth, but a lot of deaths, unfortunately, in Mammoth and near Tahoe. So we go to where the stories are. We can do that pretty easily. And yeah, we're just invested in covering the entire state. And the more we do, the bigger we'll get. And it's a fantastic state, fascinating state, beautiful place, obviously, but also just endlessly fascinating. So much to write about. And one of the stories that you brought up there, the community being torn apart by high speed rail. High speed rail is a solution looking for a problem. I mean, nobody in the Central Valley needs high speed rail to get around the Central Valley. It's the kind of thing that appeals to people like me because I like public transportation. I think it's kind of cool, but it's more a joyride for me. I don't need to depend on it. And actually, when you need to depend on public transportation, you often find it doesn't work. And that's just the nature of public transportation systems everywhere. I mean, even the nicest ones. I remember I was in Israel and they have a high speed rail that goes from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv and it stops at the airport. And it's fantastic. It's totally cut travel time and people love it. Except the day I tried to use it, it wasn't working. So, I mean, it's just public transportation. I like it, but I learned very quickly mixing public transportation with my own driving. If you just need to get somewhere eventually, public transportation is fine. If you need to get somewhere on time, you got to take a car and you got to leave early, with traffic and everything. So I think it's part of the mix of strategies, but you don't need this incredibly expensive high speed connection. We have this aging Amtrak infrastructure in California, and I used to use it a lot more often than I do now. I was surprised to learn a couple months ago that the Sacramento to Oakland Amtrak train, which they call the Capital Corridor, had only just reopened after 4 years of being offline. I wasn't even aware it was offline, but I used to take it a couple of times. I have family in the Bay Area. When I used to go to Sacramento, I used to take the train. And we can't even run an old rickety Amtrak normal train. And you've got this problem in San Diego where the coastline cliffs keep collapsing near San Clemente, which causes not just the Amtrak, but also the local coaster train to be taken offline. So we have problems with ordinary choo-choo trains. We don't really need a high-speed rail as much as we need to fix those problems because those are routes that people could actually use, but they're not even where they need to be. And if we took some of the money from high-speed rail and put them toward really building our infrastructure in a solid way where people actually travel and need to get quickly from LA to San Diego, let's say, or from San Francisco to Sacramento, I mean, we could actually make intelligent investments in public transportation, but somehow we're not doing that. We're pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into this empty hole, and we're hurting the communities out there in the Central Valley that are not benefiting from this. I mean, obviously there might be some people who benefit, there might be some unions, some contractors and whatever, but it's just absurd.
I did an event in San Diego, gave a speech, and I took the train up to see my daughter lives in Santa Barbara, and everybody had to get off at Santa Barbara and take a bus 2 stops or 3 stops up to get around what you're describing. Recently, I had you were kind enough to post what I in the California Post what I wrote about Gavin Newsom. I think your guys' timing of the launch is amplified by the fact that Newsom wants to be president, and because of that, there's a natural curiosity plus a need for people to see what he's actually done. Talk about Newsom and that dynamic with the newspaper and what you're seeing.
Right. Well, Newsom is a presidential candidate straight out of central casting with the hair and the teeth and the stature and the gestures and everything. He has fashioned himself in that mold, but he's also the ultimate symbol of California. He's a beautiful human being on the outside and completely dysfunctional in every other way. And that's the problem with California is that we're a wonderfully beautiful state. We have wonderful people, but our state is run so badly that it risks becoming a nightmare. And for me, this was theoretical for a while until my community of Pacific Palisades burnt down last year. And we thought we were a little refuge from the problems of Los Angeles and California. We didn't have homeless people. We had a few. If they came around, they usually went into the mountains above the town. They didn't really bother anybody. We didn't have a lot of crime. We only had 2 police cars on any given day, one of which at least was usually a private security car, not even a regular LAPD car. We just didn't have the rest of the problems and the misgovernance of LA. We could live at a safe remove. As someone once joked, I can see California from my house. It was kind of a little bubble, and then all of a sudden it wasn't. And suddenly all of the dysfunction and the poor leadership and the failure of coordination and the bad technology, the terrible engineering, and just the general incompetence of California governance ripped through our neighborhood. And my house survived barely, but 75% of the houses in Pacific Palisades were destroyed. Now, that's just unthinkable in an urban environment. The Great Chicago Fire happened in 1871, I think, and that's when everything was made of wood. The streets were made of wood, and there were no fire codes, setbacks, anything like that. Things went up very quickly. San Francisco earthquake, same story. It wasn't the earthquake, it was the fire that really destroyed the town. Why would that happen more than 100 years later? I mean, why? I mean, that doesn't happen in an industrialized city that's going to host the Olympics, the capital in a sense of Latin America. I mean, maybe competing with Miami for that title, but I mean, how does it happen? So we now are confronted with all the problems we tried to ignore. I mean, I wrote about them, but I wrote about them from a distance, or so I thought. Now they're on top of me. And I think the timing is right in that sense, because I think the story of the California fires is also Newsom's story. There were 2 major fires before he took office as governor. He was lieutenant governor, but there was the Tubbs fire of 2017 and the Camp Fire of 2018. And Jerry Brown tried to pass these off as climate change issues, former Governor Jerry Brown. Newsom comes into office and there are more fires. And he promises he's going to cut the brush, and he lies about it. In fact, Capital Public Radio reported that he had exaggerated his progress by something like 690%. I think that was their estimate. And he just can't get it together to do anything about it. And then the reservoir was offline, which is a local problem, not necessarily a state problem, but he hasn't expanded any of the water storage in the state. He's had 8 years to do it. Finally, the site's reservoir got federal approval. Hooray. But he's at the end of his term. This should have happened within the first year. We need water storage. We need water supplies. We've got all kinds of problems that are totally avoidable. And the thing with Newsom is he often knows what the right thing to say is. For example, he supports desalination, which I think is a great technology for water supplies in California. But have we seen him really move any of those projects through? Have they gotten anywhere? No, they haven't. So he knows how to talk to conservatives. He knows how to talk in a way that's not quite far left radical. If you try to pin him down to some of the radical positions he's actually taken, he'll just breeze by it. I once asked him why he thought parents shouldn't know if their kids transition to different genders at school, which is the law that he signed to ban parents from finding out. And his answer was, come on, you really care about that issue? It's a 1% issue. Nobody cares about that issue. I was like, yeah, they do. That's why gay rights organizations are pushing for it. I mean, why would you sign this into law if nobody cared? oh, come on, you guys are always stirring this up. Well, yeah, because parents want to have the right. So he'll just dance past it, and he doesn't want to be held accountable for the things he's signed and done. Anyway, it is a very fortunate launch in that sense. I think the country needs to know about Gavin Newsom personally, but also people need to know about California and what happens if you allow this kind of misgovernance to take over. I was speaking to someone today in the federal government who told me that unless Republicans get their act together, Newsom is probably going to be a favorite, not just to win the Democratic nomination, but the presidency in 2028. And the California Post has to do a good job of laying out for voters what that choice means. We can't force people to vote one way or another. If we could, then New York would be governed by Republicans, right? But it really is, I think, an important mirror to what's going on in the state, and I do think it tells a story that the rest of the country is watching.
I agree with you, and I, like you, travel a lot, and I w- ask people what their thoughts are, and people are attuned. They know who Newsom is. It's not like not everybody knows who Gretchen Whitmer is, but they do know Newsom. There's one thing that I penned a piece on. I'll run it by you, but Newsom, in for my mind, lacks an important skill, which is the ability to bring people together when there is a problem, come up with a solution, and shepherd it through. He's very aloof. Tony Strickland, state senator, says he doesn't even talk to Democrats in Sacramento. I bring this up because I remember seeing you on TV when Trump was in LA, and you were in the room uh, right after the wildfire, and Karen Bass sat there and told us all, "Don't worry, this will happen right away." Well, since it's down the street from you, can you tell us the truth about, from your perspective, why hasn't things happened as fast as the rest of us think it should?
Well, I'll summarize it if I can. So, the fastest rebuild after a fire happened in Santa Rosa. And the reason it happened very quickly was there was an alignment of interest between the residents who lost their homes and the city and county government. When you talk to residents from Santa Rosa, they'll say, wow, we had so much help from our local government. The relationship between residents of LA, Pacific Palisades in particular, and the rest of Los Angeles and the LA city and county governments is dysfunctional. We don't really have a good relationship with them, and they don't have a good relationship with us. And the mayor has tried to be more helpful because her political career, her reelection depends on at least looking like she's doing something. But we don't really have any confidence in the city of Los Angeles or the county of Los Angeles. And that is fundamentally what's holding back the rebuilding effort. There really just isn't a good relationship there, which is why President Trump is stepping in, why Lee Zeldin is stepping in to backstop the permitting process and say, if the county or the city are taking more than 60 days, we're going to allow you to self certify and just start your building process. So that's probably the central issue. You have other issues as well. The insurance market has changed. So when you had the Santa Rosa fire, people still had fire insurance. Well, because there have been so many wildfires under Jerry Brown in his second term and now Gavin Newsom throughout his two terms, insurance companies are leaving the state. They want to price in the higher risk, but California hasn't let them do it. So they've just stopped writing policies, and they've even kicked some existing policyholders off their policies. I think 1,000 Pacific Palisades policyholders lost their State Farm insurance policies and were pushed onto the California Fair Plan, which we jokingly, not so jokingly, called the California Unfair Plan. But there's a huge insurance problem. People are underinsured, and it's really hard to get the money to rebuild. That has changed over the last 5 or 6 years on Gavin Newsom's watch. Now, he's not the insurance commissioner, but he is the governor. He could certainly have done something about it, and he didn't. And then the other reason that things are difficult has to do with the cost of construction going up over time. My wife and I bought more fire insurance, ironically, the year before the fire because our insurance broker said to us, when you guys moved into this house, construction costs were X. If, God forbid, your house burns down, who knows, maybe it'll happen, then you guys won't be able to rebuild because you only budgeted for X in your insurance policy. Now, why don't you try buying insurance for Y? And my wife, who's an economist, said, you know what, that's a pretty good argument. Let's buy some more insurance. So we actually went into the fire with better insurance than a lot of people, but a lot of people didn't make that choice and maybe never even thought about it. Construction costs have gone up. You've got the environmental regulations, you've got the labor costs. Now, even though prices generally haven't gone up because of tariffs, you have some building inputs that are more expensive because of the tariffs. There are various different things that have become more expensive, and some of them California is to blame for. Different requirements, materials, and building codes, and all kinds of things. So you add those three things together: the lack of leadership, the problems with the insurance market, and the high construction cost, and that's why it's so slow. But lack of leadership, I think, is the most important.
Yeah, and that goes to the core of my point. If he was a good chief executive, chief executives show up, and no matter how big or small your company is, sometimes things break that day and you have to be at the center of it and fix it sometimes. California's become ground zero to the home insurance crisis, yet there hasn't been a big confab or somebody around the table to sit around and say, okay, you guys, tell me what's wrong and how we get to the other side.
Yeah, why
And
has the president done a couple of those? The president did one of those roundtables. Lee Zeldin did a roundtable. Why is it that the federal government's able to do it and Newsom can't? That's actually a great point. Why hasn't Newsom had a roundtable? And I think it's because he knows that people would yell at him, because initially he came to Palisades because he knew he had to be there, which is more than you can say for Karen Bass. Okay, she was out of the country. But he said things that were deeply offensive to people that people have not forgotten. So there was that famous clip of one of my neighbors actually asking Gavin Newsom what he was going to do, and Newsom claiming he was on the phone with the president, and then he lied. He wasn't on the phone with the president. That clip is going to haunt him into his presidential campaign. There's also that famous clip where Anderson Cooper, standing in the middle of the fire, says to Newsom, well, people are telling us there's no water. What happened to the water? And Newsom says, well, the locals will figure it out. Okay. That's not what a leader does. And then there's a lesser known clip the same day. People were still trying to evacuate, and Newsom and these other officials put up sticks and had a press conference at the bottom of the hill by Palisades. And they were all talking about what a great job they were doing. And then Newsom, this is 5 hours after the fire started, Newsom says, we hear there are people still holding out in their homes. Don't be stupid. Get out of there. You're being selfish. You're taking risks. What he didn't know, maybe he should have bothered to check, but some people couldn't get out. It wasn't a matter of, I'm going to sit here with my garden hose and put out the fire. I mean, some people were like that, and, that wasn't a terrible idea, actually. But some people literally could not get out because the roads were blocked by fire or by vehicles. And instead of pointing the finger at people who were desperate to leave, he should have been making sure there were efforts to rescue them. So that's the problem. He's just good at saying certain things, but he does not know how to manage anything.
yeah, he in his book he said image can be armor. He's
Yeah.
all about image, but there's
Yeah.
there's no substance there.
And what is
Okay,
armor?
we're
I mean, armor. I mean, is everything in politics a fight? That's how he's treating it right now. We should beat some swords into plowshares and build something.
exactly. Good. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but tell people how they can find you, and especially the California Post, which I now becomes my regular morning. And in addition to my media site, which has been around since '92, how do people find you and find the Post?
So it's californiapost.com or nypost.com/ca. We'll get you to the same place. And you can find me on X at Joel Pollak, JoelPollak.
All right. Thanks so much, Joel. Thanks for your work, and we'll be
Thank
right
you.
back with politics in perspective. Welcome back to Politics in Perspective. I'm Tom DeCaro. Hope you enjoyed that. Please be sure to sign up at Substack and support Ex American News and worldview2.com and also AUN TV. Get my books, The Divided Era and the Lessons of the American Civilization. Lately, we have been doing updates from Annie Cyrus on Iran. We'll get to the SAVE Act after at the end of this segment, but we also have a special announcement from my producer, Annie Cyrus, and she joins us now. So, what's the good news?
Thank you, Tom. The good news is my first book is finally out and available on Amazon for pre-orders. The release of the Kindle and paperback will be March 21st.
Awesome. So, tell us what's the title and tell us what it's about.
Of course. So the title of the book is The Architecture of Jihad. It is based on early praises, it is by far the first book published in America or anywhere else that puts together the entire 10 different phases of Islamic jihad, how it works, where it started, and every chapter includes a section where I give proper countermeasures for all of us average Americans, how we can push back against the jihad. And I don't mean just the jihad when you watch them blow themselves up. This goes deep into migration jihad, political jihad, financial jihad, civilization jihad. Every single section will give the reader up to 10 steps to take to avoid allowing Islamization of America to go further.
Of course, everybody, if you're listening to the show, Annie's not just some casual observer or someone from America writing a history book. What she is someone who was a political prisoner in Iran to the Iranian regime, which is Islamic, but it's imposed on the Persian culture, which was not Islamic. So this is a book born not just of desire, but of severe political and psychological pain. She was a child bride. So why don't you give us an example? Because in the old world, you face an army across the border, but that's not what jihad does. So in America, give us an example of what you're talking about.
Of course, and you're correct. In the book, I do go through the historical parts. Of course, majority of examples come from, as you said, Persian Empire, Ottoman Empire, as we have witnessed it, conquered over and over and destroyed. But the modern day jihad part we face mainly in America are political jihad, migration jihad, and civilization jihad, where you watch them come into the country as oppressed third world country refugees, but then they refuse to assimilate. They refuse to adopt our culture, our values, our laws. And that is part of jihad, where they come in a different phase, and then they become that authority that commands and demands superiority in our land,
Okay,
including...
so stop right there, because that's not just some simple desire for power, although it is. But most Americans don't, and most of the world still refuses to face the fact that the Quran doesn't say you can live peacefully and coexist. It has a different mission for its followers.
Yes. And again, to make sure your audience understand, this book has all of those texts in it. As you said, I didn't write it based on my bias, based on my pain, based on my experience. I tapped into their own text, Quran, Hadith, Surah, Sunnah, reliance of the traveler, and you're correct. In Islam and Sharia, in the Quran, in the Hadith, you are to follow the law of the land until it goes against words of Allah. And pretty much all of our constitution goes against words of Allah. There shall never be equality between man and woman. That's Sharia. Men are supposed to be superior to women. There is no freedom of religion under Sharia. You're either a Muslim or you're a dhimmi. So you put all of that text together, yes. And again, I want to be very clear. This book is not attacking Muslims. This book is not about all Muslims are this and that. This book is about the roots of what we face today, even as minority of Muslims in America. But those who are majority and might even be against these forms of jihad, they don't have a choice but to stay quiet. Otherwise, they shall be punished. with the same punishment me and you would face in Islamic majority country. So I want to be very clear, because, as soon as you say Islam, the first question is, are you saying all Muslims? No, not all Muslims fall. Honestly, Tom, I think majority of Muslims don't even know half of what I wrote in this book themselves. They probably don't even know these rules apply because they never read the Quran. They never took the time to read Reliance of the Traveler. So that being said, yes, it is not a personal desire. It is a quote-unquote religious command by their prophet, by their God.
And mullahs around the world have said similar things, whether they be in Great Britain or Michigan or otherwise.
Absolutely, and that's actually one of the other form of jihad. What we face is called media jihad. It's very modern, but even times of Muhammad, as I document in the book, Muhammad did the same thing, except back then he would write letters, send them with his messengers. For example, when he sent an invitation letter to the king of Persia, and king of Persia tore the letter and told the messenger to go back and tell your prophet that we're fine where we're at. Immediately after that was the first war, actual military war of Muhammad versus Persian king. So they did that from day one, except now we have technology, so imams can sit in front of the camera on YouTube and immediately get an answer of invitation to join Islam or face consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. So why now for this book? What particularly concerns you about America or the world today such that you want this book out now?
So when I started, I should go back, because I started writing the book right after the 12 Days War in 2025. And the reason I started it is what happened during the 12 Days War got me to understand how deeply the infiltration of Islamism has taken place, where Israel is trying to take out the biggest funder of jihad in the world, and people are against him for trying to do so. We had politicians in America who stood against him. That's when I realized it's time for, especially America and the rest of the world, to understand we need to face consequences. If we do not stand up to all these forms of jihad, we're gonna end up like Iran. Officially 2 days ago marked their 47th year of power. 47 years of tyranny, oppression, funding jihad, killing people, chanting death to America, and they still stand strong. If you think about it, standing today after, ironically, 47 days of Iran revolution, they're still standing strong, because most people, especially our politicians, Tom, don't have the comprehension of these phases of jihad to be able to make the right decision. So that's what triggered the idea of writing it.
Well, think about what the Austrian politicians said about they should wear
hijab.
Muslim, yeah, in solidarity, fully not gathering that it would never be the other way around. And it's, speaking of ludicrous, what about the UN appointing Iran to a significant post? How did you feel about that?
Well, that has become a norm for a lot of us. By us, I mean the members of counter jihad movement. We have gotten used to that. We have Saudi Arabia sitting at women's rights in a country that just recently allows women to have a driver license. They have had Iranian seats of human rights before. But what was more disturbing about UN, the conflict and the contradiction was, they put out a statement asking for urgent committee regarding Iran's revolution. 3 days later, they invited Iran's foreign minister to come to UN and give a speech on celebration of 47 years of power. And when people don't see that contradiction, that's when our job becomes even harder.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, so tell everybody where and when they can get your book.
So as of right now, they can place a pre-order For Kindle on Amazon, just look up my name, Annie Cyrus, or The Architecture of Jihad. You can place a pre-order for your Kindle version. The paper copy or paperback copies will be released on March 21st. But on March 1st, they can do pre-order signed copies on my website, liveuptofreedom.com.
Great. A great website. All right, Annie, thanks so much.
Appreciate you, Tom.
All right. Now let's switch topics to something incredibly important for America, which is the SAVE Act. Now, look, this is pretty simple. You show an ID and you vote. I used to be the chairman of the California Republican Party. Long before that, I was chairman of the county party. Even before that, I helped get out the vote. And I've seen people go up late in the afternoon, go through the list of who's voted, pick a name that hasn't voted, and walk in. This is not a new thing. Voter fraud is as old as time. Scott, it was in the American South. I covered that in the divided era. Democrats in the American South used voter fraud to keep Black Republicans from getting elected. But it's as old as time. And the battle for election integrity will never be won. You'll just be trying to keep up with it. So it is a constant. That is why, among other reasons, Franklin said, a republic if you can keep it. It is a constant battle to keep freedom. The Democrats, of course, are against this. There was a recent House vote, and here you can see it, that incredibly 213 House Democrats voted against voter ID and proof of citizenship in elections. Now, of course, they come with the same old canard, racism. Really? Because when Georgia put through its voter ID, the number of Blacks that voted skyrocketed. In fact, in the subsequent elections, the number of votes in Georgia has risen. So the idea that this is racist and going to prevent a particular race from voting is not borne out by any fact. Think about that. If there is a highly regulated way to vote, the Democrats believe that that will stop people from voting. But if it's loosey-goosey, they think more people will vote. Well, look, this is pretty damn simple, is it not? The Democrats know that they've cheated over the years, and this would make it harder for them to cheat. Republicans are on the clock. They have to succeed at this. They have to do everything they can this year, and if it doesn't get through because of, because of the filibuster, they might need to think, since the Democrats are going to get rid of the filibuster, that they get rid of it and put this through. I don't often say that, but at the end of the day, if we're going to have cheating in elections for as far as the eye can see, we can't. This may be the line to draw it on. Now let's go to my new feature, Lessons of the American Civilization feature, and this quote: "Few mistakes in history rival the belief that those seeking political power are more virtuous than those seeking economic success." Government is not the place of virgins and saints. There are more corruption in government than there is in the private sector. You hand your money over voluntarily in the private sector. But those seeking power, they're not better human beings. Some are phenomenal. George Washington, Lincoln. Some are not. But the idea that those in government are good and those in the private sector is one of the worst mistakes in history. Well, that's our show for this week. Join us next week. Please join me at Substack. Get my articles there, Facebook, and otherwise. I'm Tom Del Beccaro, and thanks so much for joining us.